It's my pleasure to read for you today a book titled Written by. Hello, for Samira, Mehdi Mirsaeidi. Let's begin. Preface. The story of For Samira is one born out of pain, compassion, and a deep sense of responsibility to shed light on a dark and often overlooked corner of our society. It is not merely a tale of one girl's unimaginable suffering, but a mirror to the systemic issues that plague vulnerable individuals in the shadows of our world. As a physician and observer of human struggles, I have often witnessed the intersection of physical pain and emotional suffering. Yet, the plight of individuals like Samira, those trapped in the inescapable grip of exploitation, societal stigma, and betrayal, represents a profound failure of humanity. This story is a humble attempt to bring voice to the voiceless and illuminate the devastating realities faced by victims of human trafficking. The narrative draws heavily on real-world inspirations, combining stories I have encountered and those I have read or heard. It is a fictionalized account, yet it strives to remain authentic in portraying the raw emotions, cultural intricacies, and systemic injustices that shape the lives of those like Samira. Through her story, I hope to awaken readers to the complex interplay of innocence, exploitation, resilience, and societal hypocrisy that defines this tragic reality. Writing for Samira was an emotionally grueling process. At times, I struggled to find the balance between telling her story with unflinching honesty and respecting the dignity of those who endure such horrors. My intention is not to sensationalize, but to humanize, to show the world that behind every statistic lies a life, a soul, and a story that demands to be heard. This book is not just about Samira, it is about countless others like her around the world who endure unimaginable suffering in silence. It is about the societal structures that fail, them, the individuals who exploit them, and the systems that must be reformed to bring justice and dignity to their lives. I invite you, the reader, to engage with this story not only as a narrative, but as a call to action. Reflect on what we can do, individually and collectively, to prevent these tragedies and to provide support and redemption for those who survive them. To Samira and all the silent sufferers, this book is for you. May your courage and resilience inspire change in a world that so desperately needs it. To bring Samira's story to life and give voice to the depths of her pain, resilience, and humanity, I created 16 original paintings. Each stroke of the brush became an extension of my soul, a visual representation of the emotions, struggles, and unspoken truths woven into her journey. These paintings are more than illustrations. They are reflections of my thoughts and emotions. Through color, texture, and form, I sought to capture the essence of her story in a way that words alone could not convey. It was my way of honoring her and the countless others like her, an artistic attempt to make her experience tangible, unforgettable, and deeply felt. Mehdi Mirsaeidi. Chapter 1. A Glimpse of the Past. It was 7 p.m., and I was stuck in traffic on Valiazar Street when I caught sight of a young, beautiful girl. Valiazar Street, a major artery in Tehran, runs like a lifeline through the heart of the city.
For a fleeting moment, I considered escaping the relentless grind of my daily life, a life that often felt like a balancing act on a razor's edge. My name is Shahnām, a 22-year-old math student at Tehran University, hailing from Saranjan, a modest village near Garmsar. I am not just a student. I am the sole provider for my elderly parents back in the village. Unmarried and burdened with responsibilities far beyond my years, I juggle a chaotic existence, switching between roles. A student navigating the complexities of higher education, a taxi driver hustling through Tehran's labyrinthine streets, and a math tutor trying to make sense of equations for others while my own life remains unresolved. Every day is a struggle to stay afloat, a relentless pursuit of stability that always seems just out of reach. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, I hold on to faint hope, hope that one day I might find a path to something more meaningful, something better. That evening, I decided to approach the girl for a closer look. To my shock, it was Samira, a girl from my village. I slammed on the brakes in the middle of the street. Samira! What was she doing here? She didn't notice me and got into a luxury car driven by a young man. I debated whether to follow them, but eventually I told myself it wasn't my business and went on with my miserable life. After a long and exhausting day of hard work, I finally made it back home, yearning for a moment of rest and solitude. That night, I replayed the day's events over and over in my mind. Yes, it was definitely Samira.
Samira was an 18-year-old girl from our small village, a place where life moved to a slow, beautiful rhythm. The village was like a symphony, with the songs of birds serving as our morning alarm and the gentle breeze through the trees as the melody of nature. Life there was simple and pure, like a colorful painting of rural charm.
Samira's life was idyllic to me. Her father owned a large wheat farm where our family worked. They had many horses with long, beautiful manes. Samira loved riding in the fields and watching the chickens in the farmyard at sunset. She was like a character out of a fairy tale, beautiful and unattainable for someone like me. Then one day, Saeed, the son of Haji Rahim, who lived in Tehran, appeared. Saeed was a bold, flirtatious young man who always sought shortcuts to wealth. He hated hard work and focused solely on his appearance. With his flashy car, he spoke of the city's glamour and belittled village life. I don't know how, but Saeed managed to win over Samira with his charm and sweet words.
For a girl like Samira, who grew up immersed in the simplicity and innocence of rural life, her world was shaped by tales of love and legends whispered around the evening fires. Stories of noble heroes rescuing young girl in distress and romanticized visions of life beyond the fields were her escape from the routine of village life. To her, Saeed appeared to be the embodiment of those fantasies. A modern-day prince charming with his flashy car, smooth words, and tales of the city's grandeur. He was everything the boys in the village were not. Bold, confident, and offering a world that seemed dazzlingly out of reach. It wasn't just Saeed's appearance or demeanor that captivated her, it was the dream he represented. In her youthful naivety, she saw him not as a person, but as a bridge to the fairy tale life she had always imagined, far removed from the earthy realities of wheat fields and farm animals. For Samira, believing in him was effortless, an act of hope fueled by dreams of escape and longing for something greater than the life she knew. But then, one day, Samira vanished without a trace. The peaceful rhythm of our village life was shattered as whispers spread like wildfire, first in hushed tones, then in loud, panicked voices. Her family, frantic with worry, searched every corner of the village and beyond. They combed the wheat fields, knocked on every neighbor's door, and even sent word to nearby towns, hoping someone might have seen or heard something. Her father, once a proud and composed man, looked like a ghost of himself, his shoulders weighed down by the unbearable weight of uncertainty. Her mother, inconsolable, clutched Samira's scarf to her chest as though it were the last tangible piece of her daughter left in the world. The village seemed to grieve collectively, its once vibrant spirit muted by the mystery of her disappearance.
In my heart, I couldn't escape the nagging suspicion that Saeed was behind it all. His sudden appearance in our village, with his slick demeanor and hollow promises, had always seemed like the arrival of a storm. I had seen the way he looked at Samira, the way he lingered too long in her presence, spinning stories about the glamour of city life. He had a way of making her laugh, of making her eyes light up with dreams of something bigger than the confines of our small world. But beneath his charm, there was something unsettling, something predatory. I remembered the last time I saw him, leaning casually against his flashy car, smirking as if he owned the world. He spoke of Tehran with an air of superiority, belittling our simple lives, as though we were all beneath him. It was no secret that Saeed had a way with words, and for a girl like Samira, who longed for adventure and romance, it wouldn't have taken much to lure her away. I imagined him whispering promises of a life filled with glittering lights and endless possibilities, a life where she could escape the monotony of our village. Yes, in my eyes, he was the undeniable reason for her absence. Despite my suspicions, I said nothing. What could I say? What proof did I have? The thought of confronting Saeed, even if he were still around, was paralyzing. He was the kind of man who thrived on power, the kind who would laugh in my face if I dared to question him. But deep down, I felt a burning guilt for not warning Samira sooner, for not trying harder to protect her from the clutches of someone I instinctively knew was dangerous.
As days turned into weeks, the search for Samira grew. More desperate. Her family left no stone unturned, even traveling to distant cities in their quest to find her. But every lead turned into a dead end, every hope into despair. The once vibrant girl who had been the heart of her family and the pride of our village was gone, leaving behind only unanswered questions and the hollow ache of her absence.
During those days, her disappearance cast an unshakable shadow over my life. I couldn't stop replaying our last encounters in my mind, wondering if there had been signs I'd missed, clues that could have warned us all of what was to come. I would sit by the edge of the wheat fields, staring into the horizon, hoping against hope that Samira would suddenly reappear, laughing and carefree as if nothing had happened. But she never did. And so, life in the village moved forward, but not without a lingering sense of loss. For Samira's family, the wound was permanent, a scar that would never fully heal. For me, it was a lesson in helplessness, a bitter reminder that sometimes, no matter how deeply you care, you cannot save someone from their fate. But, in the quiet corners of my heart, I knew I would never stop wondering, never stop searching for answers. And above all, I would never stop suspecting that Saeed, the wretched storm that had swept through our village, was the one who had stolen Samira away.
Time, as it often does, began to dull the edges of the pain. The memory of Samira's disappearance, once a fresh and piercing wound, gradually softened into a quiet ache buried beneath the routine of daily life. Conversations in the village shifted back to the harvest, the changing seasons, and the small dramas of rural existence. Her name was spoken less and less, her absence becoming another part of the fabric of life, like a thread frayed and forgotten in the larger tapestry. But for me, the shadow of her loss lingered, even as I tried to focus on my future. A year later, the relentless rhythm of time brought a new chapter in my life. I received the long-awaited news of my acceptance to university, a rare and celebrated achievement for someone from our small village. It was a moment of pride, not just for me, but for my parents, who had sacrificed so much to see me succeed. The day I packed my belongings and said goodbye to Saranjan was filled with mixed emotions. I was leaving behind the only world I had ever known, stepping into the unknown with equal parts excitement and apprehension.
And so, I moved to the shining city of Tehran, a place that seemed like a world, apart from the simplicity of the village. Tehran was alive, pulsating with energy and promise. The streets were crowded with people chasing their ambitions, the skyline a chaotic mix of towering modern buildings and the remnants of the city's storied past. Bright lights illuminated the nights, and the constant hum of cars and voices filled the air. It was a city that promised opportunity, but also demanded resilience, a place where dreams could be made or broken. For the first few weeks, I was overwhelmed. The village had been a symphony of nature's sounds, the rustling of leaves, the crowing of roosters, the whisper of the wind through wheat fields. Tehran, on the other hand, was a cacophony of horns, hurried footsteps, and the relentless buzz of life. The transition was jarring, but I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this new beginning. Despite the excitement of the city and the rigors of university life, there were quiet moments when my mind would wander back to Samira. Her face, her laughter, her innocence, they haunted the edges of my consciousness, a reminder of the life I had left behind. The city was supposed to be my fresh start, my escape from the shadows of the past, but some memories refused to fade. At night, as I lay in my small dorm room, the noise of the city muffled by the walls, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder, where was she? What had become of her? That night, haunted by memories, I struggled to sleep. At dawn, I finally drifted off, only to wake up with a determination to find Samira and confront her. I went to Valyesar Street again and again, hoping to see her. On the fifth day, I finally did. She was with two other girls. I watched her closely. It was definitely Samira, but she had changed. Her eyebrows were tattooed, her makeup was heavy, and her lips were plumped with injections. She chewed gum and wore revealing clothes. Suddenly, a middle-aged man in a Mercedes stopped in front of her, and she got in. My heart sank. Samira had become a street girl? I went straight home, abandoning my work without a second thought. The usual hum of Tehran's streets felt distant and muted, as if the city itself had receded into the background of my mind. My footsteps were heavy, dragging with the weight of confusion and disbelief. By the time I reached my small, dimly lit apartment, the air seemed thick with a suffocating silence. The cluttered desk in the corner, piled with math textbooks and unfinished assignments, stared back at me, a stark reminder of the normalcy I couldn't bring myself to return to.
I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed onto the worn-out couch. My thoughts were spinning, chaotic and relentless. Images of Samira flashed through my mind. Her face, now painted with heavy makeup and framed by the unnatural sharpness of tattooed eyebrows. Her expression, distant and hardened. So unlike the carefree girl I once knew in the village. The memory of seeing her step into that luxury car replayed over and over, each time twisting the knot in my stomach tighter.
What had happened to her? How did the girl who used to ride horses through wheat fields and watch the sunset over the village end up here, in this cold, unforgiving city? And why? The questions were endless, and the answers seemed impossibly out of reach. A surge of anger rose within me, at Saeed, at the city, at myself for not doing something sooner. But that anger quickly gave way to a deeper, more painful emotion. Guilt. Had I failed her? Could I have prevented this if I had spoken up back then? It was nearing midnight, but I couldn't bring myself to eat, let alone think about food. The single plate of leftovers in the fridge felt like an insurmountable task, as though even the act of eating would require energy I didn't possess. Instead, I paced the small room, my mind racing. Who could I talk to about this? Who would even understand? The friends I had in the city were all classmates, bright, ambitious students consumed by their own struggles and dreams. This wasn't something I could share with them. And back in the village, Samira's family was the only connection I had to her. But what could I tell them? That I had seen her? That she was alive but barely recognizable? That she had become a shadow of the girl they once knew?
The clock ticked on, its rhythmic sound only amplifying the disarray in my mind. I felt utterly lost, as if I were adrift in a sea of emotions without an anchor. Sitting back down on the couch, I buried my face in my hands, trying to will the questions away. But they wouldn't leave. They clung to me, insistent and unforgiving. My heart ached with an unfamiliar heaviness, a combination of anger, sorrow, and a deep sense of helplessness.
Eventually, I forced myself to get up and turn off the single bulb that lit the room. Darkness engulfed the space, but it did little to quiet my mind. I lay awake on the thin mattress in the corner, staring at the cracks in the ceiling as my thoughts swirled endlessly. Somewhere in this sprawling, indifferent city, Samira was out there, lost, alone, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to find her. I didn't know how, or even why, but something inside me was certain. I couldn't let this be the end of her story. The next day, I decided to find her and talk. I was angry and ashamed. How could the girl from our village end up like this? I imagined confronting her, yelling at her for her choices. But when I finally saw her again, standing under the harsh glow of a street lamp on Valiasir Street, my heart raced with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She was with two other girls, both dressed in a way that screamed for attention, yet shielded them behind a facade of feigned confidence. My voice caught in my throat as I debated whether to call out, unsure of how she would react, or if she would react at all. But then, summoning every ounce of courage, I called her name in our village dialect. The sound of it seemed to freeze her mid-step, as though it had reached a part of her she had long buried. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with surprise, and for a moment I thought she might run. Her face betrayed a flicker of recognition, and then something else. Hesitation, perhaps shame. The Samira I knew, the girl from the wheat fields and apple orchards, seemed buried beneath layers of makeup and a hardened exterior. But there she was, and for a brief second I could see the faint shadow of the girl I had once known. Samira,
I said softly, taking a cautious step toward her.
it's me, Shahnām.
Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she glanced nervously at her companions, who seemed indifferent to our exchange, preoccupied with their own conversations. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?"
I could ask you the same.
I replied, trying to keep my tone steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside me.
She hesitated, looking away, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. "I don't have time for this."
She said, her voice tinged with irritation, though I sensed it was more directed at herself than at me.
Please,
I said, my voice breaking slightly.
just a few minutes. Let's talk. There's a park nearby. We can go there. It'll be quieter.
She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a reluctant nod, she gestured for me to lead the way. As we walked, the city buzzed around us, but I felt as though we were moving through a world of silence. Neither of us spoke, and the tension was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on both of us. When we reached the park, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The trees swayed gently in the cool night breeze, and the distant sound of children's laughter seemed out of place in the otherwise somber mood. We found a bench beneath a cluster of trees, far enough from the street to escape the noise of traffic. She sat down first, crossing her arms tightly across her chest as if to shield herself from an invisible threat.
I sat beside her, careful to keep some distance, unsure of how to begin. Samira,
I started cautiously.
I didn't expect to see you here. It's been so long. Your family, the village. Everyone's been searching for you.
Her jaw tightened and she looked away, staring into the darkness of the park. "The village,"
She said bitterly.
"that place is no longer my home."
I felt a pang in my chest at her words, but I pressed on. I said, They miss you, Samira. Your family misses you. What happened? Where have you been all this time?
She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "What happened?
She echoed, her voice dripping with sarcasm.
Do you really want to know, Shahnām? Can you even handle the truth?"
Her words stung, but I nodded. I want to understand. Please, Samira, just tell me.
She looked at me then, really looked at me, as if searching for something in my face. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly.
"It all started with Saeed."
She said, her voice trembling.
"He promised me the world, and like a fool, I believed him. He told me I deserved more than that village could ever offer. And I believed that too. He made me think I was special, that I could have a life filled with excitement and adventure. But instead, he brought me into a nightmare."
Her voice cracked, trembling under the weight of the words she was about to say. She paused, taking a deep, shaky breath as if summoning the strength to continue.
"He took me to the city.
She began, her tone heavy with bitterness.
He told me we'd start a new life together, just the two of us. He painted pictures of freedom, love, and a future full of possibilities. And I believed him, Shahnām. I believed every single word.
Her gaze dropped to the ground, her hands clenched tightly in her lap.
But it was all a lie.
She said, her voice breaking as tears began to well in her eyes.
The moment we got there, he handed me over like I was nothing. Just a transaction, a piece of property to be bought and sold. He didn't even look back. He didn't care what would happen to me."
She swallowed hard, her eyes now brimming with tears that she stubbornly refused to let fall.
She repeated it with such a deep pain. "He sold me, Shahnām, like I was nothing more than a commodity, like my life had no value.
Her voice dropped to a whisper.
And for the longest time, I believed him. I believed I was worthless.
Her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, suffocating and unrelenting. I wanted to speak, to tell her it wasn't true, that she was more than what he made her believe. But the lump in my throat made it impossible. All I could do was sit there, silently absorbing the unbearable weight of her pain.
I stared at her, my heart sinking as the gravity of her words hit me. Samira? I had no idea.
I whispered, my voice barely audible.
No one does.
She replied, her tone bitter.
You all think I just ran away, that I left my family because I wanted to. But the truth is far uglier than anything you could imagine.
Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, and I fought the urge to reach out and hold them.
Why didn't you try to come back?
I asked gently.
She laughed again, but this time it was filled with pain. Come back? To what? The village that would judge me? A family that wouldn't understand? You don't know what I've been through, Shahnām. You can't even begin to comprehend the things I've seen, the things I've endured.
Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to say something, to offer her some kind of comfort, but no words felt adequate. Instead, I sat in silence, letting her take the lead. After a long pause, she finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears.
You shouldn't have come looking for me, Shahnām. My life isn't one you can fix. It's broken beyond repair.
I shook my head, my voice firm. You're wrong, Samira. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond redemption. Whatever you've been through, you don't have to face it alone.
She looked away again, her expression softening slightly. Maybe,
She said quietly, more to herself than to me. And in that moment, as we sat in the quiet of the park, I realized that while I couldn't undo her past, I could be there for her in the present. Even if it was just to listen. Even if it was just to remind her that someone still cared.
Walking side by side, I tried to stay calm and logical, suppressing my anger. She asked about my life in Tehran, and I told her about my studies and struggles. Suddenly, she broke down, crying uncontrollably. Her tears were a floodgate of pent-up emotions. I felt a pang of sympathy.
she began her story. It all started with Saeed in the apple orchard. A few stolen kisses, sweet promises, and secret meetings. One night, he proposed an exciting adventure in the city. For me, being with Saeed was a dream, a relationship full of emotions and new experiences. He became my everything. When he talked about the endless opportunities in the city, he painted a picture of a life far removed from our simple village. Bright lights, tall buildings, bustling restaurants, and lively parties. It all sounded so appealing. Gradually, his words began to seep into my thoughts, reshaping how I saw myself and my place in the world. He convinced me that I was meant for more, that I deserved a life beyond the confines of our small village, a life filled with opportunities, excitement, and endless possibilities. He painted vivid pictures of the city, with its dazzling lights, grand streets, and vibrant energy, making it seem like a world where dreams come true. He didn't just promise me a better life. He made me believe I was better, different from the others in the village. He spoke with disdain about the boys from our community, calling them aimless and small-minded, incapable of achieving anything beyond their boring lives. He made me feel as though the village, with all its simplicity and quiet charm, was holding me back. I began to see myself through his eyes, a girl trapped in a cage of familiarity, longing to break free. The more he spoke, the more I believed him, and the more I dreamed. I dreamed of standing next to him in a bustling city, walking through towering buildings, eating in elegant restaurants, and living a life that felt far removed from the dust and routine of the village. With each passing day, the city grew brighter in my mind, and the village seemed to fade further into the background. And so I dreamed of leaving it all behind to experience the life he promised. A life with him by my side, guiding me to a world that felt limitless.
Chapter 2. The Fall. After a long pause, she continued. Even though Saeed ruined my life, I still love him from the bottom of my heart. But he is gone forever.
I was shocked. Saeed's dead?
I asked, trying to understand this twist in her story. Samira nodded. The story was becoming more complicated, and my curiosity grew.
One night, we ran away, leaving behind the familiar sights and sounds of the village, and by the next evening, we arrived in Mashhad. The city was nothing like I had ever seen before, grand and alive, its streets bustling with activity even at night. But my focus wasn't on the city itself. It was on Saeed and what I believed to be his noble intentions. I naively thought he had brought me here for a pilgrimage, to seek the blessing of Imam Reza before we began our new life together. To me, Imam Reza wasn't just a revered figure in our faith. He symbolized hope, protection, and purity. Growing up, I had often heard stories of people traveling to his shrine, praying for miracles, for forgiveness, for a chance to start anew. It was said that his presence in Mashhad made the city sacred, a sanctuary for those seeking relief. And so, when Saeed suggested we visit Mashhad, I believed it was a sign of his sincerity, his love for me, and his respect for something greater than both of us. I admired him even more for this gesture, thinking he wanted our life together to begin with divine approval. After all, how could someone with such respect for religion, for Imam Reza, have anything but the best intentions for me? Yet, as the events unfolded, my faith in both Saeed and the ideals I had held so dearly began to waver. The betrayal that followed didn't just shatter my trust in him, it made me question everything I had believed in. How could someone invoke the name of Imam Reza, a figure associated with compassion and justice, while planning to exploit and destroy me? How could God, who was supposed to be watching over me, allow something so cruel to happen in the shadow of such a holy place? These questions would haunt me in the months and years to come, as my view of faith and the world became more complex. In that moment, though, I still held on to my belief, naively hoping that the shrine of Imam Reza would serve as a turning point in my life, a gateway to the love and freedom I had so desperately yearned for. Little did I know, it would instead mark the beginning of a nightmare that would forever change the way I saw the world, religion, and even myself. But my fate was far darker. Before we went to the shrine, he took me to a house, saying it was a friend's place where we could rest. The house was beautiful, and the owner, Mr. Reza, seemed respectable with his beard and a large agate ring on his left hand. There were no women in the house. Mr. Reza whispered with Saeed in the yard before we left. At around 8 p.m., we drove to another house. Saeed said we would stay there for the night. Exhausted, I agreed, and we entered a large house with a spacious yard. It seemed like a guest house. Later, I learned it was a prison for girls like me.
At this point, Samira's voice trembled and tears filled her eyes again. My curiosity turned into empathy.
When we entered the house, 2 large dogs were chained in the yard, filling me with dread. I asked Saeed where we were, and he said it was a hotel. Inside, a few women in their 40s and 50s gave us a room. It was basic, with a bed and some furniture. Saeed said he was going out to buy something and would be back soon. He locked the door behind him. At first, I thought it was for my safety. An hour passed, then 2, and Saeed didn't return. I became worried and tried to open the door, but it was locked. My heart pounded with fear. Exhausted, I eventually fell asleep by the small window. The next morning, a tall, thin woman entered the room with bread, cheese, walnuts, a glass of milk, and tea. She seemed kind and said, "I know it's hard to adjust to a new place, but if you're wise, you'll survive." I was stunned and didn't even blink. She continued, "You're lucky Mr. Reza likes you and has reserved you for the Iraqis and Lebanese." I didn't understand what she meant, but recognized Mr. Reza's name. With fear, I asked about Saeed, saying we had to visit the shrine. She smirked and said, "You won't see Saeed again? He got his money and left."
I stared at Samira, my mouth agape. Had Saeed really sold her? It was beyond belief. My mind struggled to grasp it. Samira's face was pale, her tears dried up. We walked and talked until late. She explained, I realized the betrayal. Saeed, the man I loved, had sold me. I wept for my misfortune and solitude, too shocked to even scream. I couldn't comprehend the nightmare. Eventually, another woman brought makeup and new clothes, trying to coax me into dressing up, saying my first customer would arrive soon. That's when I snapped and started screaming. I begged her, saying they had made a mistake, that I wasn't that kind of girl. She calmly said, "You'll get used to it," and left. As she closed the door, I grabbed her foot, pleading that my father had money, and I'd give her anything to help me escape. She replied, "Only your corpse leaves this place," and left.
I screamed for help, invoking God and Imam Reza, but soon a burly man entered, gun in hand, and barked at me to undress. Like a madwoman, I ran around the room, trying to escape my grim fate. Chapter 3. The Descent.
After that moment, I remember nothing.
Samira said, her voice trembling as she stared blankly at the ground, her fingers clutching the edges of her coat as if trying to hold herself together. I must have fainted. When I regained consciousness, I was lying naked on the cold floor, drenched in sweat. That monster. He had violated me. He stripped me of everything, my dignity, my innocence, my humanity. And that was just the beginning. It was the first of countless times from that day on. Her voice cracked and she paused, visibly shaking. Her tears, silent at first, began to pour down her face in streams that mirrored the anguish etched into her every word. Her pain filled the space between us, heavy and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. I felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what she had just shared. I couldn't bring myself to speak, to even offer words of comfort, because no words could match the depth of her suffering. Her trembling voice continued, but now it was quieter, as though speaking hurt her more than staying silent. Every time he walked through that door, I died a little more inside, and every time I woke up the next morning, I hated myself for surviving. I hated him, but I hated myself even more for being powerless to stop him. He turned me into something I didn't recognize, a shadow of the girl I used to be. I couldn't bear to look at her. The sheer terror of what she described, the helplessness and betrayal that lingered in her voice, pierced me deeper than I thought possible. I tried to hold it together, to stay strong for her, but I could feel my own. Tears starting to spill over. I hadn't even realized I was crying until I felt the wetness on my cheeks. But I didn't care. My heart ached for her in a way I couldn't put into words. A mix of sorrow, rage, and a guilt I couldn't explain. I felt a burning hatred rise within me. Hatred for Saeed, for the monster who had done this to her, for every vile man who had ever laid a hand on her. But there was also a sliver of hate I couldn't escape. Hate for myself. How had I failed her so completely? Why hadn't I done something when I first saw the signs? Why had I let my suspicions about Saeed stay unspoken? I was overwhelmed by the crushing realization that I had stood by, ignorant and powerless, as her life unraveled into this nightmare. Samira's sobs filled the silence between us, raw and unrestrained, and I found myself staring at my hands, clenched into fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice felt stuck in my throat, choked by the weight of everything she had endured. How could I even begin to address her pain when I couldn't even process my own? She wiped her tears away with trembling hands, but her gaze was far away, as though reliving every moment of her distress.
I hate him.
She said, her voice suddenly laced with a fiery intensity.
I hate him for what he did to me, for making me feel like I'm nothing, like I'm broken beyond repair. And I hate every single one of them who came after him. They stole pieces of me I'll never get back.
Her hatred was palpable, an inferno burning in the depths of her eyes, but beneath it, I saw something else, something far more heartbreaking. It was despair, a despair so profound it had seeped into her very being, leaving her fragile and hollow. And it was that despair, more than her words or her tears, that broke me. I wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, to tell her that she wasn't broken, that she wasn't beyond repair, but I couldn't move. I felt unworthy of her trust, unworthy of the role she had given me as her confidant. Who was I to share this moment with her? To witness her raw, unfiltered pain when I had done nothing to stop it from happening? Samira, I finally managed to whisper, my voice cracking under the weight of her story. I'm so sorry. I I don't know what to say. My apology felt feeble, meaningless, but it was all I could offer. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge my words. She was too far gone, lost in the memories of her suffering. And as I sat there, helpless and broken, I realized that no matter how much I wanted to save her, I couldn't erase what had been done. All I could do was bear witness to her story, to her pain, and vow to never forget the fire in her eyes, the fire of a woman who had been broken but refused to be extinguished. I was filled with self-loathing. Samira had been so innocent, and I had judged her so harshly in my mind. Why are we men so vile? Why do we reduce everything to sex? From myself, who had thought of her in his sexual dreams, to Saeed, that wretched opportunist, and those other vile men. I was lost in my thoughts when Samira said she had to go home. I wanted to insist she tell me more, but seeing the exhaustion and strain on her face, I held back. I offered to drive her home. Surprisingly, she agreed.
I'd appreciate that.
She said. It seemed like she had found a bridge between a hellish present and a heavenly past. Watching her, I couldn't help but think about the tenuous thread that connects who we were to who we are now. The past doesn't simply disappear, it lingers, weaving itself into the fabric of our present, shaping us in ways we often fail to notice until the weight of it becomes too heavy to ignore. For Samira, that bridge seemed fragile, a delicate structure spanning the chasm between innocence and despair. Her heavenly past was a memory of sunlit fields and carefree days in the village, a time when the world was small but full of hope. That past, though idyllic, now seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Yet it remained alive in her, a faint but persistent echo of what once was, refusing to be completely silenced. Perhaps that's why she agreed to talk to me. Maybe I too was a part of that past, someone who remembered her as she once was, untouched by the cruelty of the world, unbroken by its harsh realities. But the present, her present, was an entirely different world. It was a landscape forged in fire, full of pain and betrayal, where survival demanded sacrifices that left scars far deeper than the physical. Could such a bridge truly exist between these two worlds? Or was it an illusion? A desperate attempt to reconcile the irreconcilable? I wondered if, for Samira, the bridge wasn't so much a connection as it was a balancing act, a precarious tightrope stretched across the divide. She walked it with trembling steps, caught between clinging to the purity of her memories and facing the harsh truth of her reality. But the question that haunted me was whether such a bridge could endure. Was it strong enough to carry the weight of her suffering and the longing for what she had lost? Or would it crumble under the strain, leaving her stranded in the middle, unable to fully return to her past or move forward into her future? The thought wasn't just about Samira, it was about all of us. How often do we try to weave the threads of our past into the fabric of our present, hoping to make sense of who we've become? The truth is, the past is never really gone. It's a silent partner, a shadow that walks beside us, whether we acknowledge it or not. For Samira, her past was both a refuge and a torment, a reminder of what she had lost and what she was fighting to preserve, even if only in her heart. As we walked side by side that evening, I realized that bridges like the one Samira had found are not built from the material of our circumstances, but from the will to survive. Her bridge wasn't perfect. It swayed and creaked under the weight of her experiences, but it was there, nonetheless. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the act of building it, of refusing to let the past be erased by the present, was its own kind of resistance. In that moment, I felt a strange kind of hope, not just for her, but for all of us. Life is a series of threads, some frayed, others strong, all interwoven to form the tapestry of who we are. And while the threads may not always align, the act of weaving them, of finding the bridges that connect the hellish and the heavenly, gives us the strength to move forward. For Samira, the past wasn't just a memory. It was a foundation. And though her present seemed dark, that foundation might still hold, giving her the courage to take one step at a time, even if the path ahead remained uncertain. I dropped her off at a high-class building in Farishte. Before she got out, I asked if we could meet at a restaurant the next day. She nodded, and we arranged to meet at my friend's uncle's restaurant on Hafez Street at 8 p.m. As she walked to the door, I watched her, my emotions a jumble of pity, shame, and confusion. One thing was clear. I didn't feel any hatred towards her. I felt ashamed of my initial judgments and deeply moved by her suffering. There was still so much to learn. The next morning, I went to university, but I couldn't focus. My professor's lectures on Mobius strips and multidimensional spaces turned into images of different rooms in that guest house and layers of the lives of the people trapped there. Not a single word made it into my brain. That evening, I got to the restaurant early, my heart racing with anticipation. Would Samira come? At exactly 8:15, she arrived. She looked disheveled, her once pristine appearance now replaced by an almost indifferent neglect. No makeup, her hair unkempt, and her clothes wrinkled as if they had been hastily thrown on. Yet, there was something about her face, somber and unreadable, that carried a deeper weight, a quiet chaos beneath the surface. As she sat down across from me, the weariness in her eyes was palpable, as though she had been carrying a burden far heavier than anyone could imagine. We ordered light meals, though neither of us seemed particularly hungry. She toyed with her spoon absent-mindedly, her gaze unfocused, as if lost in a labyrinth of thoughts. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, but I resisted the urge to break it. I could sense that she was piecing something together in her mind, struggling to find the right words or perhaps the courage to say them. Finally, she began to speak, her voice low and almost detached.
Do you ever feel like you're trapped in a story you didn't write?
She asked, her eyes still fixed on the untouched plate in front of her. The question caught me off guard, but I didn't answer immediately, sensing that she wasn't really expecting a response. She sighed, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table.
I've spent so much time wondering if I should just accept my life for what it is now. The easiest thing would be to stay silent, to keep my head down, and pretend none of it happened. After all, who would believe me? Who would even care?
Her voice grew quieter, almost a whisper.
But then I think,
About what that means. Staying silent, it feels like I'm giving them power, letting them win. Every time I keep my mouth shut, it's like I'm agreeing with them. That I was nothing, that my life doesn't matter, but speaking up feels like walking into a storm with no shelter. What if it destroys me? Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her dilemma. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the way her thoughts seemed to tug her in opposing directions. She was caught in an ethical puzzle, torn between the need for self-preservation and the desperate desire for justice. Not just for herself, but for all the girls who had suffered the same fate.
and then there's religion,
She said suddenly, her voice laced with bitterness.
the same religion that imprisoned me, that people used to justify what they did to me. They talked about God, about honor, about purity, while they treated me like I was less than human.
She looked up at me then, her eyes piercing, her voice trembling with anger and pain.
Do you know what it's like to pray for salvation and feel nothing? To beg God for help, for mercy, and be met with silence? I grew up believing that God was watching over me, that He cared about people like me. But now I don't know what to believe. If God is real, why didn't He stop them? Why didn't He stop Saeed?
Her words hit me like a blow, and I didn't know how to respond. I could see the cracks in her faith, the way it had once been a source of comfort and now felt like a betrayal. She was grappling not just with the loss of her innocence, but with the loss of something deeper. Her trust in a higher power, in the idea of justice and goodness. But then, I think, she continued, her voice softening, maybe I'm looking at it all wrong. Maybe God isn't silent. Maybe He's waiting for me to act, for me to speak up, for me to do something about what happened. Maybe the silence isn't indifference. Maybe it's a challenge. She paused, her gaze drifting back to her untouched meal.
But how do you do that when you're so broken? How do you speak up when you're terrified of what will happen if you do?
Her words resonated deeply, and I found myself grappling with questions I had never considered before. Could the silence of faith be a call to action rather than a void? Could speaking up, no matter how terrifying, be a form of resistance? A way to reclaim power that had been stolen? I watched her as she sat there, her shoulders hunched under the weight of her internal battle. She was fighting a war on multiple fronts, against her past, against the present that demanded silence, and against the doubts that clouded her faith. And yet, despite everything, she hadn't given up. "Samira," I said finally, my voice steady but soft. "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. But you're stronger than you think. You've survived what most people couldn't. If anyone can build a bridge between what's happened to you and what you want for your future, it's you. And if you ever decide to speak up, know that you won't be alone." She looked at me then, a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, crossing her face. For the first time that evening, she picked up her fork and took a small bite of her food, as though testing her ability to move forward, one step at a time. And in that moment, I realized that while the answers to her questions might not come easily, the fact that she was asking them meant she hadn't given up on finding them. "I don't remember where I left off, but it doesn't matter. It's all dark and bitter," she said, her voice heavy with resignation.
Living in that prison had become my entire life, and that of the other girls. The days blurred together, each one as suffocating and hopeless as the last. It was a place where survival meant numbing yourself to the horrors around you, where hope was something you had to let go of just to endure.
She paused for a moment, her gaze distant as if she were sorting through memories too painful to fully revisit.
The Arab man, Abu Hisham, was the only one I saw almost daily, and he was genuinely kind to me.
She continued, her tone softening slightly, though not with affection but a strange kind of acceptance.
Over the past 2 years, I learned that men are strange creatures, each one different. Some form emotional connections through sex, while others are pure animals. Abu Hisham was one of those for whom sex brought feelings of affection. Maybe having feelings made sex more enjoyable for him. Whatever it was more acceptable to me than the others.
The transition in her voice was subtle yet jarring, a shift from describing the collective despair of her environment to singling out one figure amidst the darkness. It was as though she was trying to make sense of her experiences, to compartmentalize the incomprehensible by labeling it, defining it in a way that allowed her to maintain some semblance of control. Her words lingered in the air, not offering justification, but revealing the strange nuances of human behavior, even in the most inhumane circumstances. Chapter 4. The Party.
Days passed, and with my calm behavior and probably Abu Hisham's recommendation, they allowed me to walk in the yard. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. Many other girls were there, sharing the same fate.
They ranged from Miriam, who was only 11, a child far too young to understand the full scope of the horrors that had befallen her, to Argavan, who was just a year older than me, her eyes already hollowed by the weight of her experiences. Each girl carried her own story, her own tragedy, and each had been brought from different places, some from far-off towns and others from neighboring villages. It was as if this place had cast a wide net, capturing innocence and hope wherever it could, and binding us all in shared suffering. Miriam had a quiet, fragile presence that made my heart ache. She often sat curled in a corner, clutching a small doll with matted hair, perhaps the only remnant of her former life. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was barely a whisper, as though she feared even her words could bring more pain. Sometimes, in the rare moments of calm, I would see her lips moving silently, as if she were talking to the doll or praying to a god she still hoped would hear her. The older girls, including me, did what we could to shield her, offering her small tokens of comfort. A piece of bread, a kind word, but we all knew it wasn't enough. Then there was Argavan, whose strength initially intimidated me. She carried herself with a defiance that seemed almost reckless, daring the world to break her further. Her sarcasm and sharp tongue often hid the deep scars she bore, both physically and emotionally.
"They can take everything from you,"
she once told me during a quiet conversation, but they can't take your mind unless you let them. Argavan became something of a leader among us, a source of resilience when the rest of us felt too defeated to fight. Yet, even she had her moments of vulnerability. Late at night, when the house fell into uneasy silence, I sometimes heard her sobbing softly into her pillow. Other girls came and went, their fates as uncertain as our own. There was Narges, a girl of 15 who had been dragged here from a small village near Shiraz. She spoke of her younger siblings, of how she used to braid her little sister's hair each morning. She clung to those memories as though they were a lifeline, but the longer she stayed, the more her spark dimmed. There was Shirin, who had been a city girl, confident and worldly when she first arrived, but who quickly learned that her knowledge of the world offered no protection here. She spoke often of her father, a wealthy businessman who had sent her to the best schools, and she clung to the belief that he was searching for her, that he would come to save her. Over time, even she stopped talking about him.
Gradually, I became friends with them, despite the walls each of us had built to protect ourselves. It was a bond born out of shared pain, a sisterhood forged in the fires of despair. We learned to navigate the delicate balance of this life together, offering each other small acts of kindness that felt monumental in a place devoid of humanity. I was eventually allowed to visit their rooms when they didn't have guests, and those moments became lifelines for me. In their company, I felt less alone, less like a ghost wandering through a nightmare. We shared stolen smiles, quiet conversations, and dreams of escape, however impossible they seemed.
Looking back, I realized that those girls, as broken as we all were, taught me how to endure. They were my mirror and my refuge, reflecting both the depths of my despair and the flickers of strength I didn't know I possessed. Each of them was a thread in the fragile web of survival we wove together, a web that kept us from completely falling apart. Even now, I carry their stories with me, their faces etched into my memory, a reminder of the resilience we found in each other amidst the unthinkable.
From Mabube, who was just 15 and had been brought from Birjand, I began to piece together fragments of the reality we were trapped in, a reality so dark and twisted that it felt almost unreal. Mabube had a quiet, observant nature, and despite her age, she carried herself with a maturity that seemed to have been forced upon her. Her soft voice often carried the weight of unsettling truths, delivered with a calmness that only made them more chilling.
They're all part of the Revolutionary Guard.
She told me one night, her words barely audible over the faint hum of conversation from the other girls.
The Arabs, they come from Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. They're important men, powerful men.
She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the corner of the room as if the words themselves might summon them.
That's why they keep us here, why we're not allowed to escape. To them, we're not people. We're rewards.
Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I had suspected that the men who came and went in this place were not ordinary, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all the more terrifying. These weren't just predators, they were men who wielded power, men who operated with impunity. The realization was suffocating, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Escape, already a distant dream, now seemed utterly impossible.
Mahbube had learned these details in bits and pieces, overhearing conversations when the guards grew careless, or when the men boasted among themselves. She shared what she knew cautiously, as if afraid that knowing too much might put us in even greater danger.
They say they're protecting their countries, their honor.
She said bitterly.
But what kind of honor needs to destroy girls like us?
Her words echoed in my mind long after our conversation ended. The idea that our suffering was justified in the name of some twisted sense of duty or power was almost too much to bear. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, I began to understand what she meant. The men who visited us carried themselves with an air of entitlement, as though their actions were sanctioned by something greater than themselves. They spoke in loud, commanding voices, rarely addressing us directly unless it was to issue orders. To them, we were invisible, nothing more than objects in the shadows of their grand self-importance. Slowly, I was getting used to the situation there, or at least I was learning how to survive it. It wasn't that the pain or fear lessened, it was that I began to compartmentalize it, to lock it away in a part of my mind where it couldn't consume me entirely. I learned to read the moods of the guards, to anticipate their movements, to avoid drawing attention to myself. I watched the other girls mimicking their coping mechanisms, Mabube's quiet stoicism, Argaven's defiant sarcasm, Shirin's calculated charm. Each of us had our own way of navigating this cruel world, and while none of it made the suffering any less real, it kept us alive.
I think adaptation to survive is deeply rooted in our nature. It's a cruel but undeniable truth. We adapt, even to hell. At first, the shock of the fire burns, the air chokes you, and every moment feels unbearable. But then, somehow, your body learns to endure the heat. Your lungs adjust to the suffocating smoke, and you convince yourself that this is normal, that this is life. We adapt, even when it means losing parts of ourselves in the process. Even in hell, there are routines, habits, patterns that begin to feel familiar, even comforting in their predictability. We adapt not because we want to, but because we have no other choice.
And it doesn't stop there. We adapt even to the boredom of the promised hell. The everyday horrors that repeat day after day lose their sharp edge, not because they are any less horrifying, but because they become routine. Even fear becomes dull when you live in it long enough. You learn to navigate the corridors of pain, to anticipate the shadows, to find ways to keep breathing even when every part of you wants to stop. It's not resilience, it's a kind of numbness, a survival mechanism that keeps you alive at the expense of your spirit. I don't think we're heroes when we resist. We're simply operating on autopilot, driven by our primal survival instincts. Resistance isn't always a conscious act of bravery. It's often a reflex, a deeply ingrained mechanism to keep going when everything around us demands that we stop. It's not about courage or strength. It's about the sheer, automatic will to endure, to take one more step, one more breath, even when it feels impossible. But the most unsettling thing is how we adapt to the silence of promises unfulfilled, of prayers unanswered, of hope slowly withering away. Even in that silence, we find ways to go on. We fill the void with distractions, with fragments of memories, with whispers of dreams that we know will never come true. We adapt to the absence of light, to the absence of meaning, and we keep moving forward, not because we believe there's something better ahead, but because stopping feels like giving up entirely.
And yet, this adaptation comes at a cost. Every moment of survival takes something from you, a piece of your soul, a sliver of your humanity. You become someone else, someone who can endure hell but can no longer recognize who they were before. Adaptation is both a gift and a curse, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and a reminder of the scars it leaves behind. It's how we survive, but it's also how we lose ourselves in the process.
But even as I adapted, the knowledge of who these men were and the power they wielded lingered like a dark cloud over everything. They were untouchable, shielded by their positions and their connections. They moved through the world without consequence, and we were their collateral damage. The thought filled me with a simmering rage, a hatred that grew quietly within me even as I forced myself to smile and obey. I hated them for what they had done to me, to Mabube, to all of us. But I also hated the system that allowed them to thrive, that turned a blind eye to their actions while demanding our silence. As I sat in the dimly lit room that night, listening to Mahbube recount what little she had overheard, I couldn't help but feel the walls closing in around me. The more I learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about us. It was about something far bigger, something far more insidious. We weren't just victims of individual cruelty. We were trapped in a web of systemic abuse, where power and violence were intertwined in ways I was only beginning to understand.
And yet, even in that darkness, there was something about Mahbuba's quiet resilience that gave me hope. She didn't speak of escape, but she didn't speak of surrender either. She simply survived, one day at a time, holding on to whatever shred of dignity she could muster. It was a lesson I took to heart, even as I grappled with my own despair. If Mahbube could endure, then so could I. And perhaps, in enduring, we could find a way to reclaim some part of ourselves that the world had tried so hard to erase.
All the girls made one thing clear: never think about escaping. They told me the fate of Narges, who had been torn apart by the dogs when she tried to escape. It was as if we had reached the end of the world and had to stay there for the rest of our lives, serving them sexually. Our fates, the 30 or 40 of us, were intertwined, and we were becoming sisters in misfortune.
She spoke with such pain, and each word seemed to carry the weight of all her hardships. I didn't even realize how late it had gotten, and once again, I dropped Samira off at her home. The second night of our conversation ended with her saying,
Good night, Mr. Shahnām.
it was notable, almost surprising that tonight, for the first time, she addressed me by my name, and with a tone that carried an unexpected kindness. The truth was, I felt as if I was in a daze. I don't know if you've ever experienced your brain going numb, but that night, I felt it completely. Although I was curious to hear more of Samira's story, I couldn't bear the pain and suffering anymore. On the way back to my room, I thought about what was happening under this blue dome that we couldn't even imagine. Oh, my mind was so numb that I forgot to tell you we had arranged to meet at the same place the next night. Chapter 5. Revelations. I have no idea how I got through the third day. As I sat in silence, listening to the weight of Samira's words, my mind wandered to questions I'd never dared to articulate before. Was it God we truly believed in, or was it the habit of belief itself? Something embedded in us so deeply that it felt inseparable from who we were. I thought about the village, about how prayers punctuated our days, how elders spoke of divine justice as though it were an absolute certainty, and how children like me were taught to respect the unseen with an almost instinctual fear. It was never a matter of whether God existed, it was simply assumed, an unchallenged truth that shaped our lives and decisions. But now, hearing Samira's pain, I couldn't help but question whether our faith was rooted in true conviction or in the fear of what might happen if we dared to doubt. Maybe it wasn't God we respected, but the possibility of his existence, the slim chance that there might be something greater watching, judging, and holding us accountable. And if he didn't exist, then what? Were we just clinging to a ritual, a comforting lie to make sense of the chaos around us? Or worse, were we bowing to an idea out of fear, afraid that not believing might bring some unseen punishment, like failing to respect the rules of a game we didn't fully understand? Samira's story brought all of this into sharper focus. If God existed, where was he in her suffering? Where was he when she cried out? When her innocence was stolen? When she was left abandoned and broken? But then, if he didn't exist, what did that say about the world we lived in? A world that allowed such cruelty without consequence. The very thought made my chest tighten. It was easier to think that God was there, silent, but present, rather than confront the alternative, that no one was watching, no one cared, and no justice waited at the end of it all. Still, deep down, I wondered if our belief, my belief, was just a reflex, like pulling your hand away from fire. A precaution, a safety net, a desperate need to avoid offending something or someone whose existence we couldn't confirm but dared not deny. Perhaps that's all faith was. A habit, a tradition, a way to keep ourselves from staring too long into the abyss. And yet, sitting across from Samira, hearing the echoes of her anguish, I found myself questioning whether that habit was enough. Perhaps God is nothing more than a creation of the human mind, born out of a desperate need to combat the fears that haunt us, fears of the unknown, of suffering, of death, and of an existence without meaning. It struck me as I reflected on Samira's story that so much of what we attribute to divine will or intervention is really just our attempt to fill the void, to impose order on a chaotic world that offers none. We conjure an all-seeing, all-knowing presence not just to watch over us, but to give us something to blame or beg when life becomes unbearable. Sitting there, I began to wonder, if God were truly almighty, would he need our prayers, our rituals, our blind devotion? Or is this figure of God merely a reflection of ourselves, our need for guidance, our craving for justice, and our fear of facing life's uncertainty alone? We ascribe to him traits we wish existed in the world: mercy, fairness, strength, protection. But perhaps God is not a creator. Perhaps he is the created, shaped from the fabric of our fears and stitched together by our need for answers. For Samira, her belief in God had once been a beacon of hope, a promise that someone was watching over her, protecting her. But now, that same belief seemed to mock her suffering, to highlight the absence of intervention when she needed it most. And yet, the alternative, that there was no divine plan, no purpose behind her pain, was equally terrifying. Perhaps that's why we hold on to the idea of God so fiercely. The thought of a world without him, a world where we are left to fend for ourselves, with no higher purpose or accountability is too bleak for most to bear. I thought about how, in our village, belief in God wasn't questioned. It was a fact of life, like the rising sun or the changing seasons. But perhaps that belief was never really about God. Maybe it was about fighting the fear of the dark, the unknown, the uncontrollable. I don't know. If God was a creature of our own minds, then he existed not in the heavens, but in the spaces. We live where our courage faltered, where our fears threatened to consume us. He was there to give us strength when we felt powerless, to provide answers when the world gave us none. And yet, the question remained. If God was our creation, what did that say about us? Were we creators in our own right, shaping the divine to suit our needs? Or were we simply too afraid to face the truth that the world is as indifferent as it seems, that our fears are ours alone to conquer, and that the justice we long for must be made by our own hands? As I sat with Samira, watching the flicker of bitterness and pain in her eyes, I realized that for her, this question wasn't just philosophical, it was deeply personal. She was wrestling with the idea of God not in abstract terms, but as someone who had let her down. And yet, in the quiet corners of her heart, I wondered if she still clung to the faint hope that he was there, waiting, watching, ready to answer. Maybe that's what we all do, create God in our minds not because he is real, but because we need him to be. Yet, despite all my swirling thoughts, the only thing I could focus on was making it to the restaurant early. I left early, anxious not to be late, and arrived at the restaurant at 7 p.m. After waiting for a while, I went inside, got a table, and waited for Samira. My heart was pounding. Finally, at 8:15, she arrived. Again, she looked visibly disheveled. She wore no makeup and didn't seem to have even bothered to tidy her hair. With a somber face, she greeted me and sat down. She ordered a light meal and started talking. She seemed like a person in a trance. It took her a while to gather her thoughts. Then she said, I don't remember where I left off in my story, but it doesn't matter. It's all dark and bitter. Then she said, turning day into night in their prison had become my entire life, and that of the other girls. Abu Hisham was the only person I encountered almost every day. And while his presence was far from comforting, it was, in some strange way, more bearable than the others. Things continued in this way, and I was really losing hope of ever seeing outside those cursed panes when one Thursday, that tall woman showed up again. When she entered my room, she brought me a new set of clothes and said there was a party at Abu Hisham's house tonight, and he had ordered that I be present. She added that apparently I had done well and that he liked me a lot. I had never heard or seen anything like this before. She said it and left. To be honest, it was like hearing the best news of my life. I ran around and laughed from the bottom of my heart. Laughter that I couldn't believe would return to me. What could be better? I would be released from my cage, even for a short while. Although I didn't know what awaited me, crossing that big guest house door was a huge, albeit unattainable wish. Really, passing through those guards and those two wild dogs was a big dream for anyone. That day, for the first time, I understood the feeling of a bird in a cage being allowed to fly. That day, I understood the meaning of a prisoner's tears of joy after being released and the value of freedom with my skin and bones. Freedom, Samira said, her voice heavy with irony, isn't what most people think it is. When you're trapped like I was, you start to realize it's not an absolute thing. It's relative fluid, shifting depending on where you stand and what you've endured. Most people think freedom is something grand, something total, like breaking out of a prison or escaping some awful fate. But when you're in a place like that, freedom can mean something as small as being allowed to stand in the yard for a few minutes without anyone watching you. It can mean having a moment of silence in your room, or just the chance to cry without being punished for it. It's pathetic, really, how your mind starts to shrink your definition of what it means to be free. She paused, her gaze distant, as if her words were reaching into some painful, buried memory. You start to think of freedom as something you'll never have completely, something other people get to enjoy without even realizing it. For me, freedom wasn't about running away or living a life I'd once dreamed of. It was relative to the prison I was in. Freedom became the smallest mercies. When the guards forgot to lock the door, when I wasn't chosen that night, when I could sit with another girl and talk about our old lives without fear. To someone on the outside, those aren't freedoms at all, they're scraps. But when you've been starved of something for long enough, even scraps can feel like a feast. She sighed, her tone softening into something closer to resignation. The worst part is, I don't think anyone is really free. Even outside that place, people are trapped by something, by rules, by expectations, by fears. Maybe that's why the idea of freedom is so appealing. It's not that it exists, it's that we want to believe it does. But the truth is, we all just trade one prison for another, hoping the next one will be bigger, with better views and fewer chains. She continued, I took a shower, put on my new clothes, and did my makeup. I enjoyed looking at myself in the mirror. I cried and cried again. At 8 p.m., a black car came for me, and I was blindfolded and taken to the car. My heart was pounding, and I was restless. We arrived at the gate of a villa after about a 45-minute drive. The driver spoke Persian but didn't say anything except once when he told me to keep quiet. When we arrived, he uncovered my eyes, and I entered the house. It was a big party with many people. All kinds of people were speaking all sorts of languages. Maybe half of them were foreigners. Some were Chinese, some looked Russian, and some were English. There were many Arabs and a few Iranians. I realized that many other girls had been invited too, perhaps 30 or 40, but I had never seen them before. The rooms were filled with food, alcoholic drinks, and opium smoke. This was the first time I had seen drugs up close. I was so naive that I didn't even understand what was going on there or what my role and the other girls' roles were. While exploring, someone came and took me to Abu Hisham. With his broken Persian, he told me, "You are only mine, doll. No one else has the right to come near you." Then he left. The party continued late into the night. After consuming a lot of alcohol and opium, Abu Hisham was no longer the kind man he had been. That night, around 6 a.m., he made my night unbearable, and I was returned to my room in a terrible state. Despite the pain and discomfort, I felt conflicted about allowing myself to become a plaything for such a vile man. Even though everything was forced and I had no will of my own, the feeling of being able to leave that cursed prison, even temporarily, was strangely satisfying. After that night, I never saw Abu Hisham again, and every few weeks a new man would become my guest. My miserable life continued. A few months later, illness struck, and I no longer had the strength for anything. Even talking to other unfortunate girls like me made me feel worse. Seeing so much pain and suffering drove me to the brink of madness. My food intake decreased, and I began to lose weight. My clients changed frequently. It seemed I was no longer useful to them and no longer to their liking. Things were getting worse and worse, and I was getting closer to death. I had fevers and sometimes shivered through the night. Coughing and chest pain had drained my strength. Urinating was difficult, and the pain in my pelvis was driving me insane. Due to foul-smelling discharge, no man even came within half a meter of me, let alone approach me. I was embracing death, and honestly, I wasn't upset about it. I felt that I would finally be free from this pain and suffering. I remembered the woman who had told me on the first day that only my corpse would leave this place. And I was becoming a corpse. As I lay there, consumed by the fever and the relentless pain in my body, my thoughts often drifted toward death. It no longer frightened me the way it once had. Instead, it felt like an old acquaintance I was finally ready to meet. Death, I thought, might be the only true freedom left for someone like me. It was the only escape from the endless cycle of suffering, the only way to finally silence the suffering in my mind and body. And yet, even as I welcomed the idea of release, a new fear gripped me. A fear not of dying, but of what might come after. I thought about God's mercy, about the teachings I had clung to as a child. Was there any left for someone like me? Could a girl who had been broken so completely, who had lived a life of degradation and sin, of course not by choice, but by force, still hope for forgiveness? The elders in my village had always spoken of a merciful God, one who forgives all sins if you truly repent. But in the darkness of my thoughts, I doubted whether that mercy extended to me. My body had been defiled, my spirit crushed. Could God see past what I had become to the girl I once was? Or had I fallen too far for redemption? I wrestled with the idea that my suffering was a punishment for my sins, for running away with Saeed, for trusting him, for dreaming of a life beyond the village. Maybe this was the price I had to pay, a penance for the choices I had made, even if those choices were born of naivety and love. But then, I wondered, could God be so cruel? Would a merciful God punish a girl who had been betrayed, exploited, and abandoned? Or was this suffering simply the consequence of living in a world where justice and mercy seemed like distant, unattainable dreams? And yet, even in my doubt, I found myself praying, not for salvation, not even for freedom, but for the strength to endure. I prayed not because I truly believed God was listening, but because it was all I had left. In those moments, I realized that faith wasn't always about certainty. Sometimes it was about holding on to the smallest thread of hope, even when you weren't sure it would lead anywhere. I prayed for forgiveness, though I wasn't sure if I deserved it. I prayed for peace, though I doubted it would ever come. And I prayed above all for the courage to face whatever awaited me, whether it was death, judgment, or perhaps a mercy I couldn't yet understand. In my darkest moments, I clung to the possibility that, if nothing else, God might see the girl I once was, the girl who rode horses in wheat fields, who dreamed of love and adventure, who trusted too easily but loved too deeply. Maybe he would see her and grant her the mercy I couldn't bring myself to believe I deserved. One day, when I was on the verge of collapse, too weak to even cry out in pain, they finally decided to take me to the hospital. I don't know if it was out of guilt, fear of losing their property, or simply the need to get rid of a problem they didn't want to deal with. I was barely conscious when they carried me into the hospital, the harsh fluorescent light stinging my eyes. The world around me was a blur of white coats, hurried footsteps, and murmured voices. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who weren't my captors. It was strange and disorienting. As soon as the doctor saw me, his face tightened, though he tried to hide it behind a professional demeanor.
She needs to be admitted immediately.
He said to the nurse standing beside him. His voice was firm, authoritative. He didn't ask how I had gotten into this state, and I was grateful for it. I had no energy to explain, and even if I did, what could I say? That I had been discarded like trash after years of agony? That the people who brought me here weren't my saviors, but my oppressors? The nurse wheeled me into a small room, her movements brisk but not unkind. She adjusted the bed as I was placed on it and then turned to the doctor, whispering something I couldn't hear. I tried to speak, to ask where I was or what would happen next, but my throat felt raw and the words wouldn't come. Instead, I lay there, my body heavy and unresponsive as they worked around me. The first few days were a haze of IV drips, medication, and blood tests. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of conversations between the nurses and doctors. Malnourished, I heard one of them say.
Severe pelvic infection. She's going to need antibiotics immediately.
Another voice, softer, added, She's so young. What could have happened to her? Their pity made my stomach turn. I didn't want it, didn't need it. Pity wouldn't change anything. One nurse, a woman with kind eyes and a steady hand, seemed to take a particular interest in me. She sat by my bedside one evening, adjusting my IV and checking my vitals.
You'll feel better soon,
She said softly, as though speaking to a frightened child.
I turned my head slightly to look at her, my eyes meeting hers for a brief moment.
What's your name?
She asked gently. For a moment, I hesitated. It had been so long since anyone asked me my name, since anyone cared enough to know.
Samira.
I croaked, my voice barely audible.
She smiled, a sad sort of smile, and nodded. It's a beautiful name, she said. You're safe here, Samira.
Her words were well-meaning, but they felt hollow. Safe? Did safety even exist for someone like me? Still, there was something about her presence that eased the tightness in my chest, if only for a moment. As the days turned into weeks, my strength began to return. The fever subsided, the infection started to heal, and the sharp edges of pain dulled into a manageable ache. The staff treated me with care, though I could sense their unspoken questions. Who was this girl? Where had she come from? Why was she so broken? But they never asked, and I never volunteered the answers. It was near the end of my stay, during one of the many routine examinations, that the doctor sat down beside me with a somber expression.
Samira, he began, his tone measured and deliberate. We've run several tests, and I need to discuss the results with you.
I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. His pause felt like an eternity.
You've tested positive for HIV, he said quietly. Your condition has progressed to AIDS.
The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, uncomprehending as the room seemed to close in around me. AIDS.
I whispered, testing the word on my tongue as if saying it out loud would make it less real.
The doctor nodded, his face sympathetic but detached, as though he had delivered news like this 100 times before. With the right treatment, you can manage it, he continued. But it's a lifelong condition. You'll need regular medication and monitoring.
I barely heard the rest of his words. AIDS, the disease I had only ever heard of in whispers, spoken of as a death sentence or a punishment for sinners. How could this be my reality? Was this my final punishment? The ultimate price for the choices I had made or for the ones that had been forced upon me? Later that evening, the nurse returned, her kind eyes filled with an even deeper sadness than before.
You're not alone in this, Samira, she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder.
But her words felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else's story. Alone was all I had ever known. Alone was the only truth I understood. At this point, Samira broke down in tears again, crying so loudly that everyone in the restaurant turned to look at our table. I tried to calm her down. Honestly, from the beginning of Samira's story, I had been in shock, but hearing this was something I had never expected. What a painful fate. What else could you possibly hear, girl? After a short pause, she calmed down a bit and asked, "Do you know what AIDS is?" I had heard of it and said, "Yes, it's a very bad disease." As soon as I said that, the fear of catching it from her hit me. But I hadn't even shaken hands with her, so how could I possibly get infected? I was lost in thought when she started again. The doctors gave me hope that the disease could be managed with medication and that I would need to take medicine for the rest of my life and stay under their care. They said most people who get this disease either use intravenous drugs or get it through sexual contact. When they asked me how I got it, I said I didn't know. A huge lie. I was getting better, my fever subsided, my infections were healing one by one, my breathing was improving, and my spirits were lifting a bit. One day, a nurse came into the room and said I had a visitor. A visitor? I had no one. The loneliest person on earth had a visitor. A while passed, and Saeed walked in. Yes, the same wretched Saeed who had turned my life into hell. I was so angry with him that it took me a few minutes to realize how much he had changed. The robust Saeed had become skin and bones, his back hunched, and his skin looked like charcoal.
Saeed, crying, came closer and said, "Samira, forgive me for all the wrongs I've done to you. Forgive me for the suffering you've endured. Forgive me."
And then he broke down in tears, saying he was dying. He said he had contracted an infection that the doctor said would only give him a few more months to live. He had come to seek forgiveness. I asked him the name of his infection, and he said they called it AIDS. Yes, Saeed had advanced AIDS and was done for. I told him I would never forgive him and that he could go to hell. I screamed and threw him out of the room. Later, I felt sorry for him and forgave him in my heart. Saeed was my first and only love. But that day, I couldn't even stand the sight of him. After that brief visit, I never saw Saeed again. I forgave Saeed, or at least I told myself that I did. But deep down, I wasn't sure I even understood what forgiveness truly meant. Was it an act of strength, an offering of grace to the one who wronged you? Or was it a way to unburden yourself, to free your heart from the chains of bitterness and hate? Forgiveness felt like a word I could say, but never fully grasp a concept too vast, too abstract to fit within the confines of my experience. In reality, I didn't know how a human could forgive. Not completely. Forgiveness seemed like a character in a story, a distant ideal we talked about but rarely embodied. It wasn't something I felt in my bones. It was something I wanted to believe in, something I needed to believe in just to survive the weight of it all. But forgiving Saeed? That felt impossible. How could I forgive the man who had taken everything from me? My innocence, my trust, my future. How could I forgive the one who had handed me over to a life I never chose? And yet, I whispered those words to myself,
I forgive you.
not because I truly did, but because I had to. Carrying that hatred felt like drinking poison. hoping it would harm him. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift I was giving to Saeed. It was something I was trying to give to myself. It was the only way to keep from being swallowed whole by the anger that burned in my chest every time I thought of his name. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. Forgiveness wasn't something I could force. It wasn't a switch I could flip or a debt I could erase. It wasn't a moment. It was a process, and I was only at the beginning. Each time I thought of Saeed, of what he had done, the anger flared up again, and I had to remind myself to breathe, to try again, to keep saying those words until they felt true. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is, a choice we make over and over, even when it feels impossible, even when it hurts. After about a month and a half, I was discharged from the hospital and told to continue my treatment at an AIDS clinic. Surprisingly, no one came for me, but the hospital bill had been paid. I was left to fend for myself. I had no money, knew no one, and couldn't go back to my parents in the village. Alone and desperate, I sought refuge at the shrine of Imam Reza. Crying, I clung to the golden shrine and poured my heart out. It was as if I had found someone who understood my pain and knew my secret. While I stood in the shrine of Imam Reza, surrounded by the golden arches and the reverent whispers of pilgrims, my mind was waging a war within me. The meaning of God's mercy gnawed at my thoughts, twisting and turning as if it were a riddle I could never solve. Why should I, a broken, abandoned soul, kneel and request mercy? Why should I beg for compassion from a God who had allowed my suffering, who had stood silent while injustice crushed me under its weight? The more I thought about it, the more absurd it seemed. If anything, shouldn't God be the one requesting mercy from me? Shouldn't he feel shame for his silence, for the pain he let unfold in the world he created? I looked around at the other pilgrims, their faces lit with hope and devotion, their lips murmuring prayers as if each word carried them closer to divine grace. But I couldn't feel it. I couldn't summon the same faith, the same belief in a benevolent power watching over me. My suffering felt too sharp, too real, while God, this unseen, untouchable entity, seemed to float far above it all, untouched and indifferent, basking in paradise with his angels. What did he know of pain? Of betrayal? Of loneliness? My cries had echoed into the void, and I had been met with nothing but silence. Was that mercy? Was that justice? My thoughts grew heavier as I stood there, watching people around me clutch the golden bars of the shrine, tears streaming down their faces as they whispered their most desperate desires. I had come here too, seeking solace, but the longer I stayed, the more I felt like an intruder. I didn't know how to pray anymore. What could I even say? That I was broken? That I was angry? That I didn't know if I believed anymore? The words felt hollow in my throat, weighed down by a bitter mix of doubt and defiance. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined confronting God, not in a prayer, but as an equal. I wanted to ask him why. Why had he let me suffer? Why had he turned away when I begged for his help? Why had he let Saeed's lies and betrayal go unpunished? I wanted to demand answers, to hold him accountable for the pain that had consumed my life. But even as these thoughts burned within me, another part of me felt small and insignificant, as though questioning God was an act of rebellion too great for someone like me. And yet, the anger wouldn't leave. It bubbled inside me, mixing with my grief and exhaustion. I wasn't asking for much, just a sign, a small flicker of acknowledgement that I wasn't alone, that my suffering wasn't meaningless. But standing there, surrounded by the faithful, I felt more isolated than ever. Maybe mercy wasn't something God gave freely. Maybe it was something we created for ourselves, a way to survive the darkness when the light refused to come. As I opened my eyes and stepped away from the shrine, I realized I wasn't ready to ask for mercy. Not from God, not from anyone. If God truly existed, he already knew my pain, my questions, my doubts. And if he didn't, then it was up to me to find my own answers, to make peace with a world that seemed so devoid of it. Either way, I wasn't going to beg for mercy. If anything, I thought bitterly, God should be the one begging me. Anyway, I ate charity meals and slept in the courtyard of the shrine. For a few weeks, I found some peace. Sometimes, seeing young girls with their families made me miss my mother terribly. Hundreds of times I debated with myself about returning to the village, But each time I concluded that no one was waiting for me, and no one ever would. A runaway girl with AIDS and a history of sexual slavery. If the villagers learned my secret, they would surely kill me to cleanse the village of disgrace, and they wouldn't even give my body to their dogs. In my heart, I agreed with her words. Maybe I nodded my head in affirmation. Yes, I found myself grappling with the harsh reality of what she meant. In places like our village, where tradition and reputation are prized above all else, the concept of family honor is not just a value. It's a law, an unspoken but rigid code that dictates life and death. For many, honor isn't tied to kindness or morality, but to control, to appearances, to the judgment of neighbors and the whispers that ripple through the community. In these places, honor becomes a weapon, a justification for violence, a means of preserving the image of purity even at the cost of blood. In such societies, the burden of honor falls disproportionately on women, as though their existence alone carries the weight of the family's reputation. A woman's choices, her actions, or even the actions inflicted upon her, become the measuring stick by which a family is judged. And when the invisible line of propriety is crossed, no matter the circumstances, the woman is seen not as a victim, but as a stain, a liability that must be erased to restore the family's standing. It doesn't matter if the shame was forced upon her, the blame is hers to bear. The more I thought about it, the more horrifying it became. How could a culture value its reputation above the life of a daughter, a sister, a wife? What kind of justice was this, where killing your own blood could be seen as an act of righteousness? It wasn't justice. It was fear, disguised as virtue. It was the fear of being ostracized, of losing respect, of being cast out of the only community you had ever known. And so, the cycle continued, honor killing after honor killing, each one erasing a life to uphold a hollow image of dignity. I realized then that this wasn't about morality. It was about power, about controlling women, about ensuring they conformed to a rigid set of expectations that left no room for autonomy or error. In these communities, women weren't just daughters or sisters. They were symbols, carriers of a family's pride. And when that pride was perceived to be tarnished, the solution wasn't to question the system or the values that created it. It was to eliminate the woman as though her death could erase the actions that had brought shame. It made me sick to think that Samira, who had already suffered so much, could return to the village only to face the judgment of those who should have protected her. Her life, her story, her pain, none of it would matter to them. They would see only disgrace, and they would act without hesitation, believing they were doing what was right. And in their minds, they wouldn't even see it as murder. They would call it duty. They would call it honor. And that, I realized, was perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. She continued. After 2 weeks, I decided to look for work. I tried for any job, from cleaning hotels to selling in shops around the shrine. After a few days, a shopkeeper lady told me she needed a female sales assistant and hired me. I was happy to be able to stand on my own feet and start a new life. I rented a room and bought some furniture on credit. My work was going well, and my boss, Mrs. Fatime, was a kind and caring woman who had been through hardships herself. I took my medications regularly, and my tests were improving. A few months of this peace passed, and then Faramars entered my life. Faramars was a 40-year-old man with a few kids whose wife had died several years ago. He seemed like a reasonable man. He lived in Tehran and had a good job at the oil company. We were so engrossed in our world, completely oblivious to our surroundings, when suddenly the restaurant owner appeared in front of our table and said,
"Young man, take your troubles elsewhere. It's midnight and I need to close the shop."
Embarrassed, I said, "Sure, Ahmed Aga," and we got into my car. Samira seemed eager to continue her story, not caring about the time or the situation. As soon as we got into the car, she said, Faramars was the kind of man who seemed to move through life with deliberate caution, a stark contrast to the chaos and unpredictability I had come to know. At 40, he carried the quiet weight of a man who had seen both joy and sorrow, but chose not to wear it on his sleeve. His wife had died several years ago, leaving him to raise his children alone. Perhaps it was this loss that shaped his calm, introspective nature. He wasn't the type to speak more than necessary, but when he did, his words were thoughtful, measured, and often tinged with a kind of wisdom that only comes from hardship. Unlike the other men I had encountered, Faramars had a presence that felt steady, almost grounding. He wasn't loud or boastful. He didn't demand attention or try to dominate the room. Instead, he observed quietly, often listening more than speaking. There was a stillness to him that could be mistaken for indifference, but the more I came to know him, the more I realized it was a quiet strength. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone. He was a man who knew who he was, and that was enough for him. His profound understanding of life's challenges gave him a sense of maturity that manifested as pragmatism, bordering on stoicism. He didn't dwell on the past, nor did he seem overly concerned with the future. For Faramars, life was about getting through each day with as much dignity as possible.
He often said, "There's no point worrying about things you can't change. Life will do what it wants, and all we can do is try to keep our balance."
It wasn't an outlook born of optimism, but rather a deep understanding of how unpredictable life could be. He wasn't perfect, of course. His introverted personality sometimes made it hard to connect with him, and there were moments when his silence felt more like a barrier than a refuge. But there was an honesty to Faramars that I found disarming. He didn't try to hide his flaws or pretend to be something he wasn't. He was simply himself, a man trying to navigate a world that had already taken so much from him. What struck me most about Faramars was his ability to accept people for who they were, without judgment or expectation. He never pried into my past or asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. He treated me with a respect I hadn't known in years, as if he understood that trust wasn't something you demanded, it was something you earned. His quiet acceptance made me feel, for the first time in a long while, like I wasn't just a broken piece of someone else's story. Around him, I felt human again, even if only in fleeting moments. Faramars wasn't a man of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He didn't promise me the world or try to fix the parts of me that were shattered, but in his quiet, steady way, he offered me something I hadn't realized I needed. A glimpse of what life could be like if I ever found peace. He showed me that not all men were the same, that there were still people in the world who could offer kindness without expecting anything in return. And for that, I was grateful, even if I couldn't bring myself to fully trust in the possibility of happiness just yet. After a few months of acquaintance and frequent trips to Mashhad, Faramars invited me to move to Tehran with him. He was a strange man. He didn't seem interested in sex at all. He never even tried to ask, not once. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It left me confused, unsure of how to respond or what to do. In my life lately, sex had become the only request, the primary transaction, the singular reason for anyone's attention toward me. Every interaction I'd had with men seemed to hinge on this unspoken demand, reducing me to a commodity, an object to be used and discarded. It had become such an expectation that I didn't know how to process Faramars's lack of interest. I questioned it constantly. Was he being polite, or was he simply uninterested in me? Did he see me as damaged, unworthy, or was it something else entirely? The absence of his desire felt strange, almost unsettling, as if it went against the very nature of every relationship I had known in recent years. It made me realize how warped my understanding of human connection had become. I had grown so accustomed to being seen only for what my body could offer that I couldn't fathom the idea of someone wanting nothing in return. But his indifference wasn't cold or dismissive. He treated me with respect, even a kind of quiet care. His actions spoke of a man who valued my presence, who seemed content with the simple company of another human being. Still, it left me questioning my own worth. Without the currency of my body, what did I have to offer? What would keep him interested, keep him from walking away? The thought terrified me. I had no experience with relationships that didn't revolve around power, control, or expectation. What did it mean to be with someone who didn't demand, who didn't take? I didn't know how to exist in that space. As strange as Faramars was to me, his calm detachment forced me to confront the broken lens through which I saw myself and my relationships. Maybe his lack of interest wasn't indifference at all, but rather a kind of respect I hadn't encountered in so long that I couldn't even recognize it. Or maybe he was just a mystery I would never fully understand. Either way, his quiet presence unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain, making me question everything I thought I knew. About men, about myself, and about what it meant to truly be seen. After a short pause, she continued,
I wanted to keep my job and live independently, but I also needed someone who loved me and whom I could love. I really wanted someone in my life who would love me for who I was. Faramars was calm and gave me peace. He had a good financial situation and was a decent man. I didn't know what would happen if I told him I had AIDS, so I decided to keep it a secret.
She turned to me and said,
We women are miserable. Even if we hate men, we still think this one might be different.
I have never experienced a real relationship with a woman. Didn't know what to say. I just nodded and said, yeah, you're right. I was driving aimlessly through Tehran's busy streets that never seemed to sleep. Samira continued, I came to Tehran with Faramars. Mrs. Fatime agreed to keep my job for me for a month, but I gave up my room. After 8 hours of driving, we reached Tehran. It was my first time seeing the city. We went to Saadat Abad Street and arrived at Faramars's home on the 4th floor of a new building. The home was empty. The kids were staying with their grandmother in the suburb. The first week became the second week, then the first month, and several months after that. He told me he had decided to have a 99-year temporary marriage agreement, Nikah Muta, with me. I was happy with Faramars. I was genuinely happy with him, so I didn't dare tell him the truth about my life. I just said I'd been married before and divorced my husband because he was an addict to opium and abusive. I said I had a heart condition and needed to take medication for the rest of my life. I made up a bunch of lies about my family and told him. He believed everything and didn't question me. I don't know, maybe he didn't care at all. A few months passed and I was getting used to happiness. When one day, while I was going to the local grocery store, everything fell apart again and misery found me once more. A black Mercedes pulled up in front of me. The door opened and the last person I wanted to see appeared before my eyes. Mr. Reza. It seemed like my story of happiness and misfortune was like a tale of genies and exorcisms. Just when I started feeling happy, that wretched man showed up in my life again. My whole body froze like wood. I couldn't move at all.
He said, "Get in the car."
Believe it or not, I just said okay and jumped into the car.
He said, "I'm glad to see you're doing better." Then he continued, "Starting now, you will go to this address that I've written on this paper. There are 2 other girls there. You'll live with them and wait for further instructions."
In fear and with a soft voice, I said, I'm living with Mr. Faramars.
He said, "If you want to stay alive and for him to continue his life, forget about him right now." Then he said, "Get out."
I was deeply distressed and filled with rage. It was as if the world had turned its back on me again. I was satisfied with my life with Faramars. I was happy with myself. I was living like a human being again. Well, I knew how dangerous Mr. Reza was and what the consequences of disobeying him would be. I quickly packed my things and went to the address he had given me. I cried the entire way, cursing everything and everyone. I regretted leaving Imam Reza's shrine. This torment was my punishment for turning my back on him. I wished Mrs. Fatme had slapped me and stopped me from leaving. That was the first time the thought of suicide crossed my mind. If I had to become a sex slave again, I would surely kill myself. I was tired of this miserable life. I thought about all the ways I could end my life while walking. After an hour, I arrived at the building where I now live and joined the other 2 girls, making us 3 wretched girls with AIDS.
There are moments,
Samira
Began, her voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and resignation.
when I wonder if some of us are simply born to suffer, as if the fabric of our existence is woven with threads of pain instead of joy. I've heard people talk about happiness, about love, about finding peace, but those words feel foreign to me, like they belong to another world, one I was never meant to enter. Maybe there's a balance in the universe, a scale that needs to be tipped, and for every soul bathed in light, there has to be another consumed by darkness. And maybe I'm the one who has to carry the weight of that darkness. She paused, staring at her hands as if they carried the proof of her suffering. I've done nothing but endure, she continued, her tone growing heavier. I've suffered so much that I started to believe I must be the evil in this world, the reason for my own pain. Why else would I be abandoned, betrayed, and broken over and over again? It's as if my existence itself is a sin that demands punishment. Maybe some people are destined for happiness, and others, like me, are born to endure the suffering that keeps the universe in balance. If that's true, then where's the fairness in it? Where's the justice in a God who would create me just to hurt?
Her words carried the weight of centuries of unanswered questions about the nature of good and evil. Is happiness only for the pure? And if so, how does anyone escape the suffering they inherit? I've tried to find answers, but the more I search, the more I'm convinced that happiness is just another lie people tell themselves to forget the pain. Maybe that's why I feel this way, because I can't forget. I can't lie to myself. And maybe that's my crime, that I've seen too much, endured too much, and now I don't belong anywhere, not even in the arms of a God who's supposed to care. Samira's words were heavy with self-doubt, her voice tinged with a sorrow that seemed to come not just from her own experiences, but from a deeply existential place. It wasn't just her suffering she questioned. It was the very nature of existence, the purpose of a life that seemed so deeply entangled with pain. Yet, in her eyes, there was a flicker of something else, a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, she was wrong. A hope that, despite everything, there could still be a place for her in a world that didn't feel like it was built to include her. Then she said, I've talked too much. Maybe they're already looking for me, and I've put your life in danger too. She looked very distraught and exhausted. It was about 3 a.m., and I was really tired too. I was scared. I was afraid of hearing more of Samira's story. I was afraid of having an AIDS patient in my car. I was afraid of all the people around me. Every bearded man I saw, I thought could be one of Mr. Reza's men, an agent of the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, or the Iranian Intelligence Service. My heart would race every time I saw one, their presence filling me with an overwhelming sense of dread. These men, known for their unrelenting cruelty, weren't just protectors of the regime, they were its enforcers, its executioners. They didn't care about innocence or justice. Their only loyalty was to the regime's survival. They would do anything, destroy anyone to maintain the iron grip of the state. Fear wasn't just their weapon, it was their language, their way of asserting dominance over a population that had no choice but to submit. Their cruelty was legendary, whispered about in fear-filled conversations, and buried in the memories of those who survived their wrath. They weren't bound by any sense of morality, compassion, or even basic humanity. To them, people weren't individuals with lives and dreams. They were obstacles to be removed, problems to be solved, or tools to be exploited. The stories I'd heard about them, of disappearances, torture, and executions, were enough to paralyze me with terror. And now, after everything I had been through, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, hunting me, waiting for the moment to strike. Samira said, "Take me home and don't follow me anymore. I'm doing things I can't even dare to talk about. Just know that I and those girls have become death's sparrows." She said this and then fell silent, tears streaming down her cheeks. She continued, "I've lived for 20 years, and in the past 2 years, I've begged God, the Prophet, and the 14 innocents to help me thousands of times. But it seemed like God was deaf and blind." Her heart was heavy. I really didn't know if it was fear or extreme exhaustion, but she didn't say anything else until we reached her building. She got out and left without saying a word or even looking at me. That night, my heart and soul were under tremendous pressure. I felt awful. I decided that night that I wouldn't pursue Samira anymore. I was going crazy from fear. From the next day, I was even afraid of my own shadow. For the first time since seeing Samira, I was more worried. About myself than her. I thought if they had seen me, I was done for. My poor parents would die without me. What was I thinking, getting myself into this mess? Those days, I learned that too much curiosity isn't good. Who am I to think of myself as a hero and meddle unnecessarily? What business is it of mine what happens in this country? Even in public, in the busy streets and bustling markets of Tehran, I felt exposed, vulnerable. Every glance from a bearded man seemed calculated, like he was assessing whether I was a threat or an asset to the regime. I had seen their ruthlessness firsthand, how they carried out their missions with mechanical precision, devoid of any emotion or remorse. They didn't care who you were, where you came from, or what you had endured. If you were in their way, or if you held even the faintest potential to undermine the regime, they would eliminate you without a second thought. Women, children, elders, no one was safe. Their allegiance wasn't to people, to their own nation even, but to the ideology that kept their power intact. The fear of them consumed me, infiltrating every aspect of my life. I avoided eye contact with strangers, took alternate routes home, and flinched at the sound of heavy boots on the pavement. At night, I would lay awake, haunted by the thought that they could be outside my door, waiting to drag me back to a prison worse than the one I had escaped. Their cruelty wasn't just physical, it was psychological, a constant reminder that your life wasn't your own, that you were always under the shadow of their control. And yet, what terrified me most wasn't just their violence, it was their conviction. They believed they were doing God's work, that their actions were divinely sanctioned. That belief made them unstoppable, unyielding, and blind to the pain they inflicted. In their eyes, anyone who opposed them, anyone who dared to live outside their rigid rules, was an enemy of God and the state. I knew that if they ever found me, they wouldn't hesitate to make an example out of me. To them, I was nothing more than a loose end, a problem to be solved, a reminder of the cracks in their oppressive system. The fear they instilled wasn't just a passing emotion, it was a state of existence. It was the air I breathed, the lens through which I saw the world. And the worst part was knowing that their reach was infinite, their power unchecked. There was no escape, no safe haven, no place where their influence didn't linger. It was a kind of terror that consumed you from the inside out, leaving you hollow, a shell of the person you used to be. In their world, survival wasn't a right, it was a privilege, and one they could take away at any moment. Amidst the storm of my own fears, I found myself grappling with a paradoxical mix of emotions towards Samira. I felt a deep, aching sorrow for her. Sorrow for the innocence she had lost, the pain she had endured, and the life that had been so violently torn apart. But alongside that sorrow was an unsettling whisper of blame, a cruel and unfair thought that maybe, just maybe, the problem was with her too. If she hadn't run off with Saeed, I reasoned, none of this would have happened. If she had stayed in the village, if she had followed the path expected of her, none of this could have occurred. Or could it? My thoughts spiraled, conflicting and chaotic as I struggled to untangle my guilt from my judgment. It felt wrong to blame her, and yet I couldn't stop my mind from circling back to that question. Why didn't she see through Saeed's lies? Why didn't she stay? I hated myself for thinking it, but in my fear and confusion, I couldn't help but project my own unease onto her. Maybe it was easier to think she had made a mistake than to confront the larger, more terrifying truth that the world was cruel and chaotic, that innocent people could be caught in its traps regardless of what choices they made. Blaming her was a way to impose order on the chaos, to make sense of something that otherwise felt senseless. But then, a deeper part of me, the part that had listened to Samira's broken voice and seen the pain etched into her every movement, pushed back against that blame. Could anyone truly blame her for dreaming of a better life? For being swept away by promises of love and freedom? How could I judge her for wanting to escape the confines of the village, the same confines I had wanted to leave behind? Was it really her choices that led her here, or was she simply another victim of a world that preyed on the innocent, that exploited dreams and naivety for its own gain? And yet, the guilt lingered, as if by simply knowing her story, I was complicit in her suffering. Could I have done something to stop her all those years ago? Could I have said something, done something, to protect her from Saeed's empty promises? The truth was, I had seen the signs. I had suspected Saeed's intentions even back then, but I had stayed silent, convincing myself it wasn't my place to intervene. Now, that silence felt like a weight I couldn't shake, a reminder that inaction could be just as damning as action. My thoughts shifted again, this time turning inward. Was I blaming her to absolve myself of guilt? Was I so desperate to escape my own feelings of helplessness that I was unfairly placing the burden on her shoulders? The thought unsettled me deeply. What right did I have to judge her when I had done nothing to prevent what had happened? Was my fear of Saeed, of the consequences of stepping in, any different from her fear of the world she had been thrown into? And if I couldn't forgive myself, how could I expect her to forgive herself? It was a dizzying cycle of judgment, guilt, and empathy, one that left me questioning not just her choices but my own. Perhaps the truth was that we were both victims in our own way, victims of a society that valued reputation over compassion, of a system that allowed men like Saeed and Mr. Reza to thrive while crushing the vulnerable underfoot. In the end, I realized my anger wasn't really with Samira. It was with the world that had failed her, the same world that had taught me to sit silently by and watch. It was easier to blame her, to see her as the cause of her own suffering, than to confront the uncomfortable truth that I, too, had been a part of the system that had let her down. My feelings toward her weren't just about her. They were a reflection of my own fears, my own guilt, my own inability to make sense of the cruelty we had both endured. And that realization only made the storm inside me rage even harder. Chapter 6. The Village. The reality was that the meaning of life had changed entirely for me after seeing Samira. Before her story unraveled before me, my world was simple, though not easy, but a predictable rhythm of responsibilities, personal struggles, and unexamined beliefs. Life was about survival, about doing what was expected, about carving out small victories amidst the everyday chaos of everyday existence. But after hearing her, after witnessing the depths of her pain and the unimaginable cruelty she had endured, everything I thought I understood about life was turned upside down. Her story wasn't just one of suffering, it was a window into the rawest, darkest truths of human existence. It forced me to confront the fragility of life, the thin line between security and ruin, between innocence and betrayal. It was impossible to walk away from her story unchanged. The struggles I had once thought of as overwhelming now seemed trivial in comparison. The fears that had once paralyzed me now felt almost selfish, insignificant when measured against the horrors she had faced. Samira's story showed me that pain is often a reflection of a larger, more systemic cruelty, of societal failures, of power wielded without accountability, of a world that allows innocence to be crushed for the sake of greed and control. Through her, I began to see the flaws in my own thinking. I had been quick to judge, quick to assign blame, quick to distance myself from the uncomfortable truths of her experience and the destructive potential of religion when placed in the wrong hands. But in doing so, I had overlooked the larger forces at play, the inequalities, the injustices, the broken systems in a broken regime that had shaped both her life and mine. Her story didn't just make me see her differently, it made me see myself differently. It made me question my own assumptions, my own prejudices, my own complicity in a world that allowed such things to happen. More than anything, it made me realize the importance of empathy. Not the shallow, performative kind, but the deep, transformative kind that requires you to truly see another person, to feel their pain as if it were your own. Samira's story taught me that life is not just about surviving or achieving or fulfilling expectations. It's about connection, about understanding, about standing with others in their suffering and their joy. It's about recognizing the humanity in each person, no matter how broken or lost they may seem. The meaning of life shifted for me after Samira, not toward answers, but toward questions. Questions about what justice means to truly live. Her story became a part of me, a lens through which I now see the world. A few weeks passed. Slowly, I managed to overcome my fear. My thoughts became milder. I decided to spend a few days in the village to clear my head. When I reached my beautiful village and saw the gentle flow of life among the people again, I thought that peace was the most important gift for people. Having beautiful human connections was perhaps their greatest asset. Seeing the apple orchards, the chickens in the yard, the greenery, the flowers, and the wheat fields. I realized that real life was here and that I wanted to spend the rest of my life here. I no longer wanted to live in the city. I made a resolute decision to dedicate myself to educating the next generation, not just to teach them subjects or skills, but to empower them with the courage to stand up against an unjust system. I wanted to show them that they were stronger than the circumstances they were born into, stronger than the oppressive structures that sought to diminish them. My goal was to instill in them a sense of their own worth, a belief that they were capable of challenging the status quo in ways that I never could. I wanted them to know that tolerating injustice, no matter how overwhelming it may seem, was not their only option. I wanted them to see that their voices mattered, After a few days, I returned to university. 2 years later, I graduated with a bachelor's degree and returned to the village. I became a math teacher at the village school where I once studied. A peaceful life in a beautiful, serene environment surrounded by humble, kind-hearted people was all I ever desired. Most importantly, I aspired to guide and nurture the next generation, empowering them to rise above my own limitations and become stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever could be. Chapter 7. These days, it has been nearly 25 years since that unforgettable encounter with Samira. To this day, I do not know if she is alive or dead. I don't know if she ever managed to escape the clutches of those dangerous, merciless people who stole so much from her. What I do know is that she was not alone in her suffering. Over the years, I've heard countless stories from other girls, each more haunting than the last, stories that echo Samira's pain and struggle. I came to realize that what happened to her was not unique. It was a reflection of a systemic cruelty, one that preys on the vulnerable and the innocent. Her fate was tragically shared by so many others, and that truth has stayed with me every single day. In the decades since, I've dedicated my life to training thousands of students, not just in academics, but in the values of compassion, justice, and courage. My goal has been to inspire them to become better than me, to cultivate within them the strength and determination to stand up against oppression and create a world where stories like Samira's no longer exist. I believe many others have done the same, working tirelessly to prepare the next generation to challenge the systems that perpetuate such suffering. And I've seen the fruits of that labor. I've witnessed the courage of this new generation, their bravery in the face of the same suppressive forces that have ruled for so long. Despite the threats, the violence, and the fear, they have not stayed silent. They've taken to the streets, risking everything to demand an end to the Islamic government and its oppressive grip on their lives. They refuse to accept the lies, the cruelty, and the injustice. I've seen them stand tall even as they've been met with unimaginable brutality, some losing their sight to direct gunshots, others losing their lives. But still, they fight. On. Their courage humbles me. It reminds me that while I once stood paralyzed by fear, they march forward with unshakable resolve. This new generation is not silent, and they are not afraid to fight back. They embody the spirit of resistance that I could only dream of, the spirit that Samira and so many others deserved but never had. And while I still don't know what became of her, I find comfort in knowing that the world she once endured is slowly being challenged, piece by piece, by those who refuse to accept its darkness. Samira's story, like so many others, may never have the justice it deserves, but her suffering was not in vain. It has become a catalyst for change, a reminder of what must be fought for and what must never be forgotten. To this day, I have never shared Samira's story with anyone and have buried it deep in my heart. But enough is enough. Sometimes I thought maybe her illness had taken her, or perhaps she had ended her own suffering. But honestly, I didn't have the courage to dwell on it. Sometimes, in my solitude, I cry for her innocence. When the villagers call Fatemeh Zahra the oppressed of history during mourning ceremonies, I silently scream that Samira and girls like her are the real oppressed ones in this country. I will share her story with anyone and everyone who will listen. The world must bear witness to the injustices she endured, for her voice, though silenced by cruelty, deserves to echo far and wide. Her story is not just hers, it is a testament to the countless others who have suffered in silence, and the world must never forget. Religion, when involved with compassion and understanding, has the potential to offer people like Samira a sense of hope, strength, and the belief that they are never truly alone, even in their darkest moments. Perhaps it was a fragile hope, but the belief that God was watching over Samira may have been her only source of comfort in an otherwise unbearable reality. I dreamed of a day when I could openly share my heart's deepest truths with the world, a day when Samira's story, her innocence, her suffering, her strength, could be told without fear, and her voice could finally be heard. But more than that, I wish for a future where governments are built on the foundation of fairness and equality, free from the oppressive grip of ideology or religion. I long for a time when religion is no longer a tool of control or suppression, but instead resides quietly in the hearts of good people, inspiring kindness, compassion, and a genuine desire to help one another. A future where faith brings happiness and unity, not division and fear. Hopefully, that day will come, a day when stories like Samira's serve as a reminder of the past we left behind and the better world we chose to build. The end.